Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 38. I'm your host, Dylan Sessler, and today I've got a special guest for you. But before we get to the guest, make sure you like, subscribe to this if you're on YouTube. If you're following on another podcast platform, make sure you follow. And let's get into it. My guest today is often called the marketing nomad. She's an entrepreneur, a business owner, podcaster, YouTuber, digital nomad, and a nano influencer. I don't even know what that means, but I'm sure she's going to tell me. With a zest for life. She started her company, the Marketing Nomad, in Delaware, United States, with the sole purpose of empowering entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and small business owners across the world to implement long-term, actionable marketing strategies and help them grow their business with confidence. Her social media platforms guarantee a bucket load of marketing, mindset, and business tips, along with her quirky sense of humor and side of wit. Today, though, we're going to be talking about some of the difficulties she's had to face getting to where she is today, and she's got quite a story. So my guest today is Prithvi Madhukar. Prithvi, or Prit, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dylan. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's been an absolute, honor hearing from you, and I'm so excited to share my journey with all your listeners.
Yeah, and it's quite a story.
Yes.
Let's just get right into it. It's an honor to have you. Tell me, obviously you're the marketing nomad, but you have been through a lot just doing that, and I imagine there's more before that. Tell me about, one, what drew you to become what you are today, and at some point you need to tell me what a nano influencer is, but that's a side question. Tell me about your life. What brought you to social media? What brought you to, what changed your life? What were the moments that kind of built who you are today, Britt? So floor is yours. Go ahead and tell me anything. I might interrupt and ask a few questions, but it's all yours.
Sure. Absolutely. So Dylan, if I were to look back on my life, I think that there are two pivotal moments in my life which have led me to where I am today. So I'm going to talk about the first one, and then because that will lead into the second one. So the first one is that I grew up in Singapore, and then I came to India when I was, I think, about 11 or 12. And then I had a pretty normal, whatever people consider as normal these days, a normal, high school life. And then it came to a point where I had to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And at that point, I think I was around 17 years old. There is a lot of pressure in the Indian society, especially, to either be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. Any other degree that you take up is not going to be looked at with respect, or people feel that you are not going to be successful in that field. So naturally, because of all of this entire societal pressure, I definitely succumbed to it. And I said, okay, maybe engineering is not going to be so bad. Let me try engineering. I'm going to do it. And then, as every Indian feels, you do engineering and then you figure your life out. Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. And I went into engineering, and within the first year, I was not happy. I absolutely knew that I was not in my element. It was not just about the marks or, about doing well academically, but I just did not find my passion for whatever it was. There were a lot of people around me who absolutely knew that engineering was their niche. They were feeling so themselves. They knew exactly what they wanted to do with their life. And I didn't. It was, the second year pulling in, I was getting more and more anxious because I couldn't see the next 40 years of my life doing engineering, being at a table doing engineering stuff. I honestly, even at that point, and even today, I don't even know what engineers do at their job, but the whole thing of it, I couldn't see myself doing it. And, somewhere around that time, my parents were starting to feel that I was just not interested in my academics, nor was I interested in anything to do with my life, to be honest. And, I was starting to lose interest in even just, smiling and listening to Bollywood music. All of those things are something that I absolutely enjoyed up until then. And I just stopped. feeling like I needed to live life. I just thought, okay, well, this is how my life is going to be. I'm just going to, go through it every single day, go to college, do whatever I have to do, and then come back. And then it's the same process again and again. So around this time, my dad, it was the summer holidays for my second year of engineering. And my dad said, why don't you do something with your life? I mean, it's a very typical Indian parent, let me tell you. Why don't you do something with your life? It's the holidays. Why don't you come work for me, get a job, and figure something out? So I said, okay, fine, whatever, let's do that, typical 18, 19-year-old me, whatever, let's do it. Okay. So I went to his company, and he asked me to handle the marketing side of it. So I had to figure out what goes on the website. I had to figure out their social media stuff, what they needed to post. The company was 25 years old at the time, but they had absolutely no online presence. So basically, I got to work. And I realized at that point that everything just kind of clicked for me. I had not studied marketing before. I did not even have an exposure to marketing up until then, but somehow things were just fitting in. Somehow I knew what I had to do. There was this basic instinct that was going. And not just that, I was happy. I was actually happy doing that. I completely lost track of time. But at that point, of course, because there's so much pressure around you and all of those things, I didn't think I could make a career out of it. I didn't even know it was called marketing until years later, to be honest with you. I just thought it was website and social media. And I said, no, nobody earns an income from this. You can't really earn much from this. The person who was working on the website and the social media guy was actually an engineer himself, and he was an IT guy. Mm-hmm. So I was like, no, nobody's going to pay me for this. So I came back the next 2 summers. I worked with my dad's team, helping him, helping the business set up their own online presence. From 1x, we grew 2x online, 3x, and that was amazing for me to see. I was learning on the go, and then I also figured that I just had inherent instinct, and I'll come to why that is a little later. But I guess I was just so interested, and I absolutely loved it, that I kind of plucked up the courage after engineering, and I said, I don't think this is for me. I can't do this. I'm not happy. I'm just so anxious about my life. I don't want to live a life where I'm sad all the time. I want to be happy. I'm a happy person, just even in general, but this is just really sucking the life out of me. And of course, at that time, my parents were they were definitely hesitant, because, what is everyone going to say? What are people going to say? It goes against their own thoughts and vision of what they had for me as well, right? So it was a little bit of a tricky area, but they could see the remarkable difference in me when I was doing my engineering and when I was working on my dad's company stuff. So they said, okay, fine, what do you want to do? I said, well, at this point, I think I want to, start my own business someday, maybe 5 or 10 years down the line. So let me do an MBA. I'll get my MBA degree, and then I'll work for a few years, and then I'll start my own company. So it was around this time that I immediately jumped, from engineering. I did not even apply to any of the job interviews, which was really weird because everyone was looking at me like I was crazy, but I was like, no, I just have one plan, and that's pretty much it. There is no plan B for me ever. And I got into a very, very good MBA university in Rochester, New York. So from India, I went to Rochester, New York to do my MBA. And in the first semester, in the first class, I sat down, it was a marketing class, and the teacher was just asking questions just to kind of gauge the level of the class. And I'm just sitting there like a total nerd. I'm just raising my hands for every single question, and I'm answering it. She even asked about some marketing campaign that Coca-Cola had 10 years ago, and then another campaign about Maggie. And I knew these things. And it was at that point that it made sense to me that my entire life, I had always focused on these aspects. I had always, when I was reading the news, when I was reading articles, these were topics that were particularly interesting to me. And I'd actually taken the time to read it, to understand it, and to actually remember it 10 years down the line. And it was in that moment that I realized I found my passion. I absolutely know what I want to do. with my life. This is something that I can see myself doing for the next 50 years of my life. So that's when I realized that, okay, I found my passion, but it doesn't stop there. I had no business degree beforehand. I was definitely a lot behind in terms of knowledge of the industry and the business when it came to my peers. And I had no marketing knowledge. I mean, whatever I had read was just from the news or articles. It was not a very technical knowledge of marketing. So I really worked my, everything off.
Well, you
I
can say it
really
here.
put, oh, okay. I
You can
really
say it
worked
here.
my ass off. Absolutely. 4x times. And I think that was an important lesson for me that yes, you will find your passion at some point, but you have to work really, really hard at it. It doesn't, just because you have a knack for it does not mean that you are going to sustain that passion or you're going to sustain your expert level at that passion. So I worked really hard. I still continue to work hard as, the marketing nomad, gaining as much marketing knowledge as I can. And I guess, if like there's a one tip, the first tip that I can give your audience in terms of mindset would be, if you are at a stage in your life where you're not sure of what you want to do next, I understand that it can be scary. It can be so, so scary. Honestly, at some point, I was so anxious and it was just really hard for me. But the point is that when you keep an open mind, when you know that you are not happy in your current state, there's going to be, your mind is going to be open and receptive to finding something that you are passionate about. So you have to acknowledge that you are not happy where you are. You have to stand up, because it took a lot of courage for me to stand up to my parents, stand up to the society, because there was a lot of people looking down. It's not the norm to do marketing, at least at that time. Maybe now that I've spoken so much about it in the last 2 years, maybe people are a little used to it, but it wasn't so back then. So I guess the first tip would be, if you are feeling lost, be open to the fact that, you will find it at some point. And when you do find it, and if you're lucky enough, and you will be, when you do find it, work hard at it. It's not something that, it will sustain on its own. You have to keep working at it. You have to keep improving your skills. You have to keep making sure that that passion still exists and still continues.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to that, to everything you just said, but I want to kind of hone in on this concept of parenting, because it's incredibly relatable
Yes.
to, I think, many generations, not just mine and yours, but many generations and cultures, right? You have Indian cultures. It's still here in America too, right? Like that's the interesting thing, is that we're not all that different, right? Our parents always kind of have had these expectations of,
Yes.
this is what I want you to be. I want you to be better than me, or I want you to be this, or I want you to, I always kind of want you to do more than what I've done, right? Or do it
Yes.
better, or take over my business, or take over this, or do this, right? And in many ways, it doesn't matter what culture you're from. It's this concept of judgment, is that when you expose your children to judgment, it becomes remarkably difficult for them to find themselves. It becomes remarkably difficult to create their own identity, which is ultimately what I think many humans are trying to do every day, is
Yes.
develop an understanding of who am I,
Right.
and what am I, what do I want to be, how do I want to act, and all of these questions that are deep and intrinsically identity focused. um and you add judgment into that, and it just becomes so uh degrading to that process, to find that. And I'm curious, like, what inspired you to go against your parents, to stand up to them, because that's not a common thing, I don't
No.
think, very often, right? Like, it's what is not common is when it's young, right? What I often see is that people become receptive and aware of, my parents are an obstacle, but they become aware of it at 40 and 50 and 60 years old, and realize for the first time that man, my parents caused a whole lot of problems because social media is exposing them to things like trauma and things like child abuse and things like, you know, passive aggressive behavior and narcissism and all of these things. I'm curious, what made you see it at a young age?
Okay, quite a few things. Actually, from a very young age, I definitely would say that my parents were a little bit more protective of me compared to my peers. Very, very honestly, if I have to compare, um, I was not given that much freedom as my peers were given. And I think maybe from my parents' perspective, they did not want me to make the same mistakes as they did, or they just wanted me to grow a certain way. At that point, right from when I was a kid, there was a lot of frustration, a lot. I definitely held it against them. And of course, today, as a 29-year-old, having processed all of those things, I do understand that at the end of the day, they are humans themselves. They have their own limiting beliefs. They have their own imposter syndrome. They have their own, trauma that they're overcoming and all of those things. So, but at that point, I think that I was extremely frustrated right from when I have been a kid. I always felt that I was very restricted. I always felt that I was not given the freedom that my peers were given. And I held that against my parents. Very, very honestly, I did hold that against them. And I think because of that, I have always been a rebel. I think that that triggered that rebellious behavior in me. And not just with my parents, but even at school with my teachers, I was always bold. I was the first one talking. I was sent to the principal's office a lot. And I even stood up to a math teacher who was discriminating based on gender. And these were who I like. These characteristics and these traits came from that. So when you ask me what brought it on, I think it was just my nature. I think it is just how I've always been. And very early on, at some parts of my life, few incidents made me realize that my parents can be wrong too. Very, very distinct incidents in my life that made me realize that my parents are humans. They can make mistakes too. And I think it was that belief in myself that I know exactly how I want my life to be. And I believe that I can do this. Gave me that courage and that strength to stand up to them and say, no, I want to do this. I don't want to do engineering. I actually want to do my MBA. And a little after that, I don't want to take over your business. Both my parents are entrepreneurs themselves. Both of them are engineers themselves. And I was held to very high standards, even while growing up, extremely high standards. Both my parents, like my mom topped her university in engineering. So, and my grandmom was a PhD holder. So there was a lot of expectations already on me. And I think that firm belief in myself that no, I have a very strong sense of what's right and what's wrong for myself, and understanding that they don't know what I'm feeling. They don't know what thoughts are running through my head. So they might not always be the best people to make a judgment for me. I, however, have been with myself. I know exactly what I'm thinking. I know what I'm feeling. I know, how to process things. I know the life that I want for myself. So who's the better person to make the judgment? Me. And, and if in the future, I feel that that decision didn't pan out the way it did, then I only have myself to blame. I would rather in the future blame myself than blame somebody else for, I don't know, strategizing my life for me. And I think it was that that thought process that I had at a very young age that led me to make that decision.
That's really interesting because that is not the rule. That is the exception, right? Like most people don't grow up with that mindset or that mentality or
No,
even
they
that understanding, because that's incredibly wise to
Well,
to
thank
grow
you.
up with, right? Well, it's realistic. Like most people don't realize that their parents can be wrong.
Yes.
right? They just don't grow up that way. Especially, I don't know what it's like in India, but I know what it's like in America.
Mm.
I was taught to respect my elders, and what that was not explained to me, that wasn't explained to me. So I had to create some understanding of what does respecting my elders look like, making
Yes.
making them look like they're always right, even when they're potentially wrong. And so, it's rare for children to create that critical depth of thought to look at life and look at other people and look at how people explain things to you and judge you, place expectations on you. And it's remarkable to see another person, because I was very similar growing up, right? I went through a whole lot of stuff, and yet I came out with the very same wisdom that you have, right? One of the things that I quoted in my book is, you are the only person that's going to be there for yourself 100% of your life.
Absolutely.
That's, I mean,
Absolutely.
you said it, right? Like we came from very remarkably different cultures, and we've
Yes.
never met before. And yet we found the same message almost
Yes.
identically. That's,
Yes.
that's what I think is really remarkable about this, is that it's out there, but it's not
Mm.
common.
Yeah.
And why? Like, I'm really curious as to, when did you start realizing that you believed in yourself?
Okay, that's very interesting question, Dylan. So, in all fairness to my parents, they have always made sure that I was extremely independent, extremely, to a point, to a fault of their own, because I ended up making independent decisions that probably were not in alignment with what they envisioned my future to be. But they have always insisted that I be independent, I make my own choices, I make my own decisions. But it came to a point where those decisions were only low level.
Mm-hmm.
The higher level decisions were still made by them. So I think it was a little bit of a change in our relationship dynamic, where I had to also say that I'm an adult, which of course, if you are coming from an Indian culture, you're never an adult. You will always be your parents' kid. But
Jeez.
I think it was trying to change that relationship dynamic, saying I think I'm ready to make a high level decision for myself. And it took a little bit time of convincing, but I also do have to give credit to my parents, because I think that they were also aware of their behavior, and they realized that, okay, it's time to let go. And I mean, at the end of the day, they're humans too. It does take them some time
Yeah.
to get to a point where they can be open to the idea of letting go. And I think that it is a two-way street. I don't think that it was all on me
Yeah.
to have done that. I think it was a two-way street. Yes.
It's always really interesting, right? Especially, when we talk about cultural differences, because it's just Indian culture, and I've worked with a couple of Indian clients myself. It's remarkably interesting, right? It's the family dynamics itself. Um, we look at it from maybe a Western cultural kind of viewpoint, and would say, well, that's really toxic. But in retrospect, you also have to understand that there's incredible amounts of support if it's in the
Yes.
right direction,
Yes.
right? Which is kind of the viewpoint where, sometimes the West doesn't always know what is right for everybody. And yet at the same time, we have an understanding, right? Like, we also understand that can be remarkably toxic for people that don't fit the mold of Indian society. um and certainly we are not the arbiters of culture, right? We have our own toxic mentalities, and um you know I mean, we can definitely get into those, but like, every culture has its own kind of
Yes.
development of what is right and wrong. And you can juxtapose each of those with different cultures and see where the benefits are and the risks are. But it is very interesting to kind of compare the two of what the United States culture is versus Indian culture, and see the difference. And I'm curious, when you started to have these conversations, was it, when you started to have these conversations with your parents, was it really focused on the culture? Was it really focused on the interactions of like, hey, this is when you do this, it hurts? Or was it really focused on like, hey, Indian culture does this and it really pisses me off. And I don't want to do that. Like what was that kind of conversation like when you were trying to stand up for yourself and hold space for yourself? What did that look like?
So I don't think we ever brought culture or societal pressure into the equation. I think that my parents made it very clear that, if before I started engineering, they said, if you're moving forward with this, then, it is your decision. You have to take it on 100%. And, but, on the other hand, I don't think if I had taken any other decision, I don't think I could have confidently taken up that decision. I would have been afraid of what the society would have thought. So I don't think in the conversation that I had with them, it was anything to do with culture or society. For us, we're a very close-knit family. It's just the four of us, my sister, me, and my parents. I didn't really have much interaction with my grandparents. So it's always just been the four of us, and we've been very frank and honest with each other. We have extremely open conversations as a family. So for me, it was more so about telling them that I'm not happy. I can't see myself doing this for the next 40 years of my life. And like I said, Dylan, my parents already could see that I was just not happy. I was crying during the nights. I was anxious. It just wasn't me, in a lot of ways. And I think that also, like, seeing the physical, the physical effects of me being so unhappy actually helped them with their decision as well. I think that was the deciding factor more than my conversation with them.
And they didn't invalidate those feelings at all, like telling you to stop crying or anything like that, or get over it or anything like that. They allowed those things.
Well, for the most part, I think they only saw probably 10% of what was
Sure.
actually going on behind the scenes. Um, there were times where, they thought, just go with it, it's going to get better. This is just how life is. Life is a little hard. Once you do engineering and you start working, everything's going to figure out, you're going to figure out,
Yeah.
everything's going to fall into place. So it was not that they were invalidating my feelings, but I think that they felt it was just a normal phase
Yeah.
of my life. They just felt that this would be over in a little bit. And when it didn't, when it started getting really, really bad for me, I think it was at that point that they realized, okay, well, this is not a phase.
Yeah.
This is something different. And I think that's when it hit them. And right about that time, I picked up the conversation.
It's interesting. Yeah. I imagine with the tighter knit family, that honesty goes a long way, right? And it sounds like it, the conversations weren't invalidating, which is always important, because from what I've seen from Indian families are, uh, because of the vastness of
Yes.
Indian families, right? Like you get this situation where the older generations are telling younger generations, like, you need to get over this, you
Yes.
need to do this, and we are invalidating your feelings because we did it, right? If we can get through it, you can get through it. And what I've seen is it often leads to, don't talk about it, right? Which is no different than US culture. It happens here too. It happens in
Yes.
different ways, right? In many ways, there's things like religion, and certainly I'm sure it's the same
Yes.
in Indian cultures. Religion has some effect, but I see it a lot. Religious trauma of, hey, for me, like specifically, like my dad committed suicide when I was 6. I was told he was going to hell, right? And to understand that at 6 years old, like, one,
Yeah.
you don't have the capacity to understand that concept,
Yes.
but
Yes.
you're told that, and then you have to
Yes.
figure it out. You weren't. It wasn't a discussion. You don't talk about
Yeah.
suicide back then, because this was 1996 when this happened, and the culture just becomes, and there's many different realms of this, and it's not just suicide. There's many different things that, and I think it's coming out right now, is there's a lot of people
Yes.
talking about like deconstructing the Christian religion. And is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't care about that. What I do know is that Christianity in America has been used to traumatize people, whether it's been knowingly or unknowingly, and throughout history, it's been used to traumatize people, right? I mean, we can go there, but the it's certainly been used to build cults. It's been used to control women. It's been used to control kids, right? And culture has been built upon these ideas. And so the same things happen just in different circumstances, and religion's not the only thing. But it's certainly a huge part of, certainly like my culture. I'm a white man from a rural area, so I guess there's certainly there's certainly a lot of identifiable kind of situations that religion was a huge part of what kept me silent. And I imagine, with you having a smaller family, it kind of opened up
Yes.
there's not 47 people in my family judging my parents of how they're dealing with
Yes.
you crying.
Yes.
It's just them, and they're looking at
Yes.
you, and for the first time they can actually have open, empathetic conversations with you, which I really think, like looking at your story, looking at my story, looking at other people's stories, honesty and empathy, when you combine that in parenting, you really craft a way to develop a child to start believing in themselves, right? And I think independence matters,
Yes.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because if you aren't given the opportunity to uh go figure it out safely, right?
Yes.
I love how, Jordan Peterson talks about it. He says, never interrupt a child when he's doing something dangerous carefully, and when you give a
Yes.
child that opportunity, they learn, right?
Yes.
Certainly they can get hurt, but they're going to learn things from it, and be cautious about it, be safe about it as much as they can, but they're also going to take risks.
Yes.
And that's, something both of us have done, is we've taken those risks. We've been independent, but we've also learned how to understand dependence,
Yes.
in a healthy way, it seems like, right? Like I still have my mom, and I have dependence on her, and you have your parents, and you have dependence on them. Um, I'm curious, what do you think all of this, right? Like where you're at now, what do you think is your struggle right now? Like where, I certainly know where mine are, and we can talk about those, but I'm really curious where, through all of these things that you've been through, and we haven't really even gotten to like the business stuff, and you
Yeah.
being what I more or less
Yeah.
deported, right?
Yes.
You know, we haven't talked about that, but what do you struggle with in many ways now?
With respect to my relationship with my parents, or
I guess
the
anything.
independent, and okay, with any. So I actually live with my parents right now. 29 years old, living with my parents. It was a little bit of a struggle in the beginning because, you know, first off, I was living by myself in New York, and coming back, and I think that I had changed in a different way. My parents had changed in a different way. And that initial time of us figuring out what is working, me needing my independence, my time for myself, I think there was a little bit of a clash in the beginning. I will definitely be very honest. But I think that it took some communication on both our ends, you know. For me, laying down, first of all, understanding what my boundaries are, you know, maybe the fact that I need at least 2 hours of my time in the night, or just to detox from the world, the time that I need to work on my business, all of those things. You know, there were different equations in the mix, and I think learning what exactly was acceptable and not acceptable to me at this point in my life was a process for me. Secondly, learning how to communicate that in a way that was not offensive to them, or to, you know, not invalidating myself as well, was a very delicate balance that I think I've done a very good job so far. Because if I look back at the conversations that I've had with them, it wasn't just, okay, sit down, I have to talk to you. It wasn't like that. It was a very natural progression of me building up from little things all the way, helping them understand my point of view, and then letting them know that I understand their point of view. I understand where they're coming from, but we've got to meet at a common place where they're happy as well as I'm happy. And getting to that equation in our relationship took some time. It took a good 6 months for us to adjust, and then COVID hit. So it was lockdown.
Yeah.
So I was really glad that I had, kind of figured out all of those equations before COVID hit, because I think it would have been really, really tough to immediately go into lockdown, having, our relationship not exactly synced to where it should have been.
Right. Yeah. I mean, having a poor relationship with anyone you live with would be terrible for COVID, right? Because you're stepping into a situation where you have to be with them potentially 24/7.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. And maybe that begs some context of, you were in the US, right? And then what happened, maybe let's build some context of what happened. Like, why did you have to go back?
Yeah.
And what are your plans in the future?
Perfect. Okay. So we ended the story with me in my first class of marketing and me realizing that, hey, I found my passion for life. I was on top of the world. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And I totally aced my MBA program. So after that, I got a job at a top solar firm in New York as a marketing coordinator. And I was so happy in that job. I was absolutely in my element. This was something that I could see myself doing for the next 40 years of my life, which was so important to me. I was happy. I had an amazing set of friends. I had amazing colleagues. I had really good mentors, and just every part of my life was just fitting in really, really well at that point. So in the US, you get 1 year of work that you can work on your student visa. Wow, that was a complicated sentence. Okay, so you get 1 year of work time on your student visa, and then after that, you have to convert it into a work visa. And the work visa process is a lottery. So at that point, my work visa actually did not get processed, and that meant that I had to come back to India. And oh my God, Dylan, it was so painful. It was absolutely gut-wrenching. Everything that I knew and thought to be true was no longer going to happen. The life I imagined in New York, the vision that I had for my life, everything. Yeah. And I felt that I had to start from absolute scratch. And not just that, I had finally found happiness in a lot of ways, because up until then, I don't think I have mentioned this before, but up until then, I was in constant pain throughout my life. There was always some sort of drama, some sort of just a lot of craziness that was happening in my life. And that was the first point in my life that I actually understood what happiness was. I understood what it felt to be truly at peace with myself. I understood the person I was. I understood who I wanted to be. All of those things, everything was just clicking. And to have all of that just suddenly taken away from me, it was very, very painful. And at that point, I started thinking, well, is this what my life was always meant to be? Like, is it just always meant to be pain, pain, pain? Am I not allowed a little bit of happiness? And, all of those, that entire phase was pretty dark, and we can of course go into it a little bit later. But once that happened, I had to come back to India, and that was when, I was not in my best mental health space, I guess I would say. Yeah. My parents also were trying to get used to the fact that they thought I had a different life. Their vision of my life also had changed. It was not the best atmosphere. They coped with it a lot better than I did. Let me be very frank about that. Yeah. And they understood what I was going through. And it was around that time I realized that I am starting from scratch. absolute scratch. So I was getting ready to send my resume on LinkedIn at that point, and I I I don't know what or how it happened, but I just thought, well, I'm already at the bottom. Okay, I can't get any lower than this. So maybe, I start my own business. I start something on my own. I think that it wouldn't be right if I didn't take advantage of the fact that I was already at the bottom. And I thought, okay, let me start my own business. Anyway, I had planned to do it 5 or 10 years down the line. It's just a little bit early right now, but let's try it out. Let's try it for a year. Let's see how it goes. And if it does go well, then I will continue. If it doesn't, well, anyway, my resume is ready. I'll just send it across, not a big problem over there. So it was around this time that I said, okay, I'm starting my own business. Let's get to it. And then it started with small steps. To be honest, I think that me coming to the decision of starting my own business came from a lot of anger. It came from a lot of pain. It came from a lot of frustration. Anger because I think that in certain societies, there is a common perception that you can only be successful in a certain place, city, country, or circumstances. So when this happened, everyone, all of my friends who were there around me, started to look at me very differently. There was pity. They thought that my career was over even before it started. And I think that in that anger, in that frustration, I told myself that regardless of where I am in the world, I am going to be successful. And it was through that determination, and it came from a lot of pain, but I'm glad, I guess it did. I decided that I would start my own business. I said, I'm going to be a digital nomad, and I'm going to help businesses across the world. I'm not going to be limited by any border. And that is how my entire journey started. And that's why I actually came back to India.
It's incredible. I mean, you know, getting what you want, right, is one thing.
Mm,
Losing it is
yes.
is incredible grief, right? And then now you've come to this place where you've almost gotten something else that you wanted, right? I mean, that's incredible, right? And you might lose it again. You never know. Um,
Absolutely.
but it's really powerful to, I think, because I'm in a very similar position where I've lost, and I've lost a lot in my life, and I've also come to a place where I've found a lot, and I've
Yes.
created a lot, and I've created something out of, almost something that wouldn't have existed had I chosen it, made a different choice, um, quite simply. And I can't expose enough how important it is to recognize your own ability to do what you can do, right?
Yes.
That's the idea of kind of, I'm kind of toying with this understanding of, I'm digging into values and understanding what it really means to have value and place value on your decisions. And it's brought me to this idea of faith, right?
Yes.
And I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about, believing in God or anything like that, but the idea of having faith in your own values and your own
Mm,
value. Because you can tell yourself, like, I'm an empathetic person, or I have high integrity, but if you don't have faith in that, you don't
yes,
have those things, right?
absolutely.
Like, you can have faith, you can have a value of, I value family, but if you don't have faith in your family, you don't have a solid, you don't have a solid value there, right? Family's not a
Absolutely.
solid value, but yet you maintain those values. And I think a lot of people do this, is that people maintain these values without the the understanding that they need to have an eternal foundation of faith
Yes.
to do so, and to define your values, and to create this idea of, like for me, my three main core values are integrity, empathy, and learning. And those things, I have abundant and eternal faith in those things, because not only have I defined them, I've created boundaries on them, right? When I'm too empathetic, I get hurt. When I'm not
Yes.
empathetic enough, I hurt myself. because I'm hurting my relationships, right?
Yes.
When I'm not focusing on learning what the right thing to do is, I'm making mistakes, and I don't like
Yes.
that. When I'm doing too much of what is right, I become overburdened, right? Because I can't always focus all my attention in making sure I'm
Absolutely.
doing the right thing, because I'm not really learning what I need. I'm focusing on everyone else's need, and I'm creating boundaries because I have the faith in what those values are, and I have a faith in what the definitions of those are. I understand my limitations. And I think a lot of people really struggle with that, and struggle to respect themselves enough to say, this is what I want, right? I want that down the road, but to get that, I need to create this
Yes.
foundation of faith in what it takes to get there, and I think clearly you've done that. Like if you haven't done that, you don't make a business like you've made, right?
Yes.
Like certainly, because I'm standing on the other side. I've made a business myself. I know what it takes, right? You have to have at least some understanding of faith in your messaging,
Yes.
right? You have to have faith in your ability to maintain that messaging, right? You're not just going to peddle bullshit for
Absolutely.
the rest of your life for 40 years, because then you're going to look at yourself and say, I don't like what I'm saying. I don't like what I'm sharing. And someday that's going to eat at you,
Yes.
you know? And so I think we're seeing entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and all of these, influencers coming out for the first time and realizing, especially on TikTok, because I'm a TikTok guy. They're realizing that I don't want to be the Instagram model of what social media
Yes.
looks like.
Absolutely.
I want to be real. I want to talk about the shit, right? not just the
Yes.
beautiful sunrises and sunsets and the modeled pictures. Like
Absolutely.
I want to sit down. We're going to talk about some shit here, right? And go into what it means to own a business or run a business or do this or do that. And it's really cool to see what you're doing. It's really cool to see how you've kind of built yourself up and see clearly you know what you're doing, right? And even though you have suffered from imposter syndrome, and so have I in some regards, that we're still going, right? Because
Yes.
even though imposter syndrome is a real thing, it's a good thing in many ways, because it reminds you that you need to keep learning. You need to keep focusing. Something you talked about earlier, right? Like you
Yes.
always need to adapt yourself, because if at some point you say, I know that right now everything is, I'm right,
Yes.
and you never change, right? You will someday be wrong.
That's
And
true.
if you don't have imposter syndrome, you won't change. You won't realize that, holy shit, I'm wrong. And being wrong is as you said about your parents, right? We're human beings. We're going to be wrong. We have to be wrong, because that's how culture changes, right? If your parents never had those conversations with you, or never allowed those conversations with you, they
Yeah.
never would have realized that they were wrong. And you would have
Absolutely.
never realized you were wrong to them in some ways, and it's really good to see, one, that you have repaired that relationship with your parents in some ways. Not everybody can, and not everybody will, but you have, and that's important to you. You've built a business, which is incredible. And it's good to see that. And I'm curious, you've been to the United States, now you're back in India, but you've been to the United States, and you're also a woman, which is another thing, right? Because not only are you Indian and you were in the United States, but you were a woman in the United States, and you're a woman as an entrepreneur, which is not as common, right? It's certainly more common now, but there has to be some situations where both being Indian and being a woman caught you in a situation of either sexism, misogyny, um, you know, potentially racism. Like, tell me about that experience. Like, if you have any experiences of that, and how has that affected you? How does that impact you going forward? Like, how do you deal with those situations?
Oh, I'm so pumped to talk about this, Dylan. I am not even kidding. I have been talking about this on my Instagram page for 2 days now. Like the conversation started with
Perfect.
International Women's Day. And, I've been educating the people who follow me about the discrimination that exists and whether, it is because I'm an Indian and whether it is because I'm a woman. And it is definitely one of the most important lessons that I have learned in this entrepreneurial journey. And I'm so excited to like share it with you. I'm so excited that you
This
actually
wasn't
brought the
even
topic out.
this
I know
wasn't
it
even
wasn't
planned.
even like,
Like,
I know. And I'm just like, I'm literally in the same energy because I just posted it on my Instagram story. So I'm like totally pumped to talk about it. But I think the first lesson that I had to learn as an entrepreneur is I needed to stop focusing on the woman aspect of a woman entrepreneur. I had to stop focusing on that. And it was the reason why is, have you noticed that when you are thinking of buying a red car, okay, suddenly you see red cars everywhere. It's pretty much the same thing. When you focus too much about being a woman, instead of focusing on the fact that you are an entrepreneur, you're just an entrepreneur, you start to look at every single problem that comes into your business as a reason, I mean, as you know, as a I think as a consequence of you being
yeah.
a woman. It happens. It did happen in the beginning stages. And I realized I had to stop looking at myself as a woman. I am just an entrepreneur, and that is the way I'm going to function. Whether or not the client hires me, whether or not, something happens in my business, it is not going to be because I'm a woman. There are a ton of other factors that make up who I am. And I refuse to focus on the word woman when it comes to women entrepreneur. And even the term women entrepreneur, I actually don't like it at all. And here's the reason why, Dylan. So basically, when the society came up with these terms like boss girl or shero or women entrepreneur, what actually happened was that people were not able to perceive women in those roles. Okay, when you
Yeah.
think of an entrepreneur, you're going to think of a man standing in front of like a table, probably posing for a business magazine. You're not going to think, the first thought that comes to your mind isn't going to be a woman. So people, in order to move away from that perception, they couldn't accept women having those terms, so they started creating these new words: woman entrepreneur, shero, boss girl, all of those things. And I think that, a lot of people have come up to me, they're like, oh, but Prit, aren't they focusing on women? Isn't that a good thing for us as a collective? And here's my thought. We weren't offered a seat at the table. We were given another table and another seat at the table. And the minute you start to recognize that you weren't actually given a seat at the table, you were actually given another table, it actually starts to tick you off. Because when we are talking about equality for women, and we're talking about wanting equal rights and equal pay, it doesn't restrict to just the pay scale or the monetary aspects of it. It also is to do with your thought processes, equal thought processes, equal mindset, equal opportunities for both, or for all genders for that matter. And when you realize that you are not even at the same table, it's a little detrimental to the progress that we feel we are making as a collective. So, I mean, this is why every time someone calls me a woman entrepreneur, I always correct them. I say, no, I'm an entrepreneur. Let's go with that. I'm not a woman business owner. I'm a business owner. I'm not a female podcaster. I am just a podcaster. There are so many ways that people want to try to water down the word that is perceived for one gender. But I think it is on to us. And the first thing that I did was I stopped focusing on the women part of woman entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner, podcaster, YouTuber, nano influencer, a digital nomad. In no way am I going to focus on my gender, my race, so many other aspects that make me as unique as I possibly am. And another thing that has helped me when I stopped focusing on the woman part of it is I started looking at myself as a collective. Okay, the caste I belong to, the religion I follow or not follow, my thought processes, my childhood, my upbringing, societal influences, my race, my religion, what else? I said religion, my gender as well. I started looking at it as a collective, as all of those factors make me who I am, and I think that there is such a misconception that, we have to look at women as women. When you start doing that, it's only detrimental to your own mental health. You start looking at problems everywhere, even though they may or may not even be a problem there. And I think that, is one message that I really want to communicate. Don't, hold boundaries of who you are based on all of these factors. Look at yourselves as a whole, and it becomes that much more easier for you to walk through life, for you to handle all the problems that come your way.
I think it's a remarkable perspective. I'm curious though that there's a piece of this where there's experiences that women have versus men. There's
Yes,
experiences that Indians have in America,
yes,
or even Indians in India. Like the experience of being a woman in India versus being a woman in the United States, comparatively, like what are those experiences in terms of that? Obviously you have this really, really interesting perspective, and it's very, I think I absolutely agree with it. It's very similar to how I look at things, because it is so important to understand the collective. But you also still have experiences as a woman
yes.
that I will never probably have, right? As a man, especially a white man, right? Like, and so I'm curious. Obviously, you have that perspective, but how do you deal with experiences that are very solely uh, woman related versus man related?
I'll ask you that question back, Dylan. How do you handle the experiences that are exclusive to you being a man versus the experiences that anybody else would go through? It's basically the same thing. Those are the factors that make you who you are. You have to accept them, yes, because I am a woman. Yes, there are going to be unique challenges that come to that, but there are also unique challenges that come based on the color of my skin. I'm not
Mhm.
kidding. The unique challenges when I start nitpicking all of these things, okay, that, oh, this podcaster said something, and it's happened to me before. This podcaster said something because I was an Indian, because of the color of my skin. When you start nitpicking all of those, you can go down a rabbit hole so quickly,
Yeah.
so quickly. So when it comes to dealing with these experiences that are exclusive to me being a woman, or me having the color of my skin, or me being having the race that I belong to, I look at it as a whole. I just take it as an experience of who I am altogether. All right. I can't say that your journey is easier because you are a man. I can't say that. I can't say that my journey is tougher or harder because I'm a woman or because I'm an Indian. I don't know your journey and you don't know mine. We're each in our own cycle. We are each in our own lane. And when you start nitpicking, you are trying to get into someone else's lane, and that often leads to comparison, that often leads to competition. Again, that's a different zone altogether. But when you realize that, all right, I have this problem, and it's part because of who I am as a whole, because of all the factors that make up who I am, it's just that much more easier for you to deal with it. And that way you don't say, oh, his journey is easier because he's a man. No, all of those thoughts actually stop. And plus, to be honest, and I think you will agree with me, Dylan, we don't have the time to think about all of these things. Honestly,
Yeah.
like, I mean, with the amount of things that are going on with my business, if I were to start nitpicking every single problem that came about because I was a woman, or because I was an Indian, I would have to spend a lot of time figuring out that. Instead, if I were to just say, okay, that's because I'm Prit, I have these problems because I'm Prit, let's move on, let's figure out how to tackle them, let's take a mindset shift, a day to process it, maybe if I need, and then, do some mindset work and then move on from it. So it's collective. It's not just one problem.
And I absolutely agree with that in some regards, but it still begs the question of that works on an individual level in terms of
Yes.
how to change yourself, but how does that work for the collective of society, right? Like, because when we nitpick these things, right? And I look at social media, like we have a very remarkably comfortable understanding of social media
Yes.
at this point in our lives because we've both done it. I look at this and I look back to 30 years ago and what it was like for a woman to deal with sexual assault. I look at it 30 years ago and I look at what was it like for a man, and just kind of two contrasting kind of
Yes.
perspectives, right? But similar issue in terms of how we talk about it. 30 years ago for a man to talk about suicide, right? Those are two issues that collectively 30 years ago were
It was
not
difficult. Yes.
we're not allowed to discuss. We weren't allowed to have conversations about it because people were like, shut up, it's a problem, right? Like we don't want to have those conversations. And so I'm curious, like, with your perspective, absolutely, I think it works individually to help you kind of focus on where you need to go. But is there value in kind of nitpicking these things as a collective to say, because look at TikTok now, right? There's a massive collective of people talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault, suicide, right? It's what I do, right? And I talk about both. I talk about trauma. I talk about rape. I talk about sexual assault, sexual harassment, and I talk about things that people wouldn't talk about when I was born. So what do you think about that in terms of opening up that conversation, talking about those nitpicky details of being a man, being a woman, being a person of color? We talk about racism, things like that. What do you think about that?
Okay. So I think you bring up a very good point, because up until now I was talking about the individual level, but when we are talking about a collective, it's a little bit different. Okay. Because as much as, I know what I went through, I don't want someone else to feel that they're alone in the journey. B, I don't want people to think that these things don't happen, because when you skim over those things, when you pretend like it's not happening for a collective, it is harmful. Yes, I absolutely agree. So there is definitely a distinction with how I handle it on a personal level and how I do it for a collective level. Absolutely. I talk about all of these on my social media platforms. I am very vocal about what I believe in. I am vocal in the experiences that I've had up until now. Even though when it was time for me to process them, it was more about me focusing on myself as an individual and all the factors combined. When I do talk about these experiences, it is more to bring awareness. Because in certain situations, people may not realize that they are being racist. People may not realize that they're being, they're discriminating you. And if I don't voice my opinion, if I don't tell them that, hey, I did not feel that was right, that was actually, pretty racist, or that was, a discrimination based on my gender, then A, people will never learn. B, the same cycle repeats with every single other person out there. And like you said, with the invention of social media, with how it is, people are more vocal about these things. It has helped us being as a collective to talk about these things. Back then, when I wanted to, mental health and talking about all these things growing up during my engineering days, we didn't have all of this. Like there was no one talking about it. Even while I was going through my early teens, no one really told me what exactly I was going through. There was a lot of things that I had to process by myself, and it was mostly self-awareness. But today it's very different. Today, because people are talking about their experiences, you talking about your father, you talking about your relationship with your mother, me talking about the relationship that I have with my parents who are Indians. I'm busting myths, and I'm busting myths myself, because people have a certain misconception about Indian families. And here I am telling, no, it can actually be different. You have to make sure that you are working and you have their support to make it different, and all of those things. So yes, I absolutely 100% agree that for a collective, it is important for us to talk about our experiences, for us to have these conversations with each other. You know, even if you feel that you're not sure if you're being racist, or if you're not sure whether you're discriminating, talk about it, ask the right people, you know. I definitely feel that is important. Yes.
Yeah, and that's, it's communication is a collective, uh what is collective discussion, right? Like where we have to be
Absolutely.
able to, I ask you these questions not just because I want to share it with my audience, but I also want to
Yes.
understand how I can
Absolutely.
better communicate with people that are different than me, right? And it's not to look at you and say you're different in a bad way of being racist or
Absolutely.
being sexist. It's how can I communicate with you to be effective, right? Like,
Absolutely.
because I want to be friends with you. I want to be friends with everybody else. Like I don't
Absolutely.
like I'm military, right? That's an interesting thing about my life is I'm military. I'm a sniper, right? One of my jobs is to kill people. My other job here is to talk to people, to communicate people, to help people learn how to live. And so I know that other aspect of life where I'm here to take life when necessary. And then on the other aspect of life, I don't want to take life. I want to help life, right? And that's my goal is like I want to bring people together to have conversations, to be comfortable communicating, because I know what it can lead to, right?
Yes,
If you can't,
absolutely.
right? I do not ever want to uh, go to someone else's home and take their life. That's not my goal.
Absolutely.
I didn't. That's not why I joined the military, and that's a difficult discussion around the world, especially with the United States, because we've done that, right? And that's a difficult part of our history, and I'm sure that will be a discussion that we have many years from now and continue to have. But
Absolutely.
like we're human, we make mistakes, and I'm not saying that
Absolutely.
that's an excuse on what the U.S. military has done or the U.S. has done in general, but it's a discussion we're going to have someday. Is like it's a difficult position for white people right now, and that's it's not to invalidate the feelings of people of color. It's a hard
Absolutely.
it's a hard place for men to be, right? And that's not invalidating
That
the
is true.
the
It is
position for women, right? Like it sucks, like because men, right? Like men were taught to be this, right?
Yes.
And then now all of a sudden social media is telling them that they are the demon, right? They are the problem, they are the issue.
Yes.
And that's it's not just men, it's not just white people, right? Men do it back to women, right? They've been doing it back to women for millennia. And so it's a difficult position to be in terms of whoever you are right now. And that's not to,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's not to invalidate anybody's experience. It's to understand that all experiences are valid. And that means we have to have further conversations about these things of like, there's a reason men commit suicide like almost 4 times more than women. And there's a
Yeah.
reason why women attempt suicide. I think it's like 2 or 3 times more than men. Um, and we could go on with the statistics, but we need to have conversations and we need to be able to ask questions. And, I think it's really important that you know, you have these two differing perspectives of
Absolutely.
this is how you deal with a collective, and this is how you deal when you are
On a
individually
personal front. Yes.
trying to develop yourself. And I think it's really incredible. One thing I think it's a really beautiful perspective to have and to hold, because it pushes you forward regardless
Absolutely.
of who the fuck is trying to hold you back. um
Yes.
and I love that, because that's definitely how I look at things. And yet you're willing to kind of put out there and understand like, hey, we need to have awareness about this. And I love that too. So yeah. Prit, is there anything else that you tell me about your business? And before we get into that, what is a nano influencer? And then tell me about your business, because I've been curious about that the whole time.
Okay, so but wait, before we get into that, sorry, I just want to pick on the fact that we were talking about the collective And, that's why I asked the question to you back, Dylan,
Yeah,
because,
it's a good
there are
question.
certain challenges that you go through as a man as well. You are an entrepreneur, you are a business owner, but there are certain challenges that you go through specifically because you are, with the gender that you identify with. And I would not have known that if other men had not spoken vocally about this, had not,
Mhm.
talked about their stories and all of those things. And that's why I think it's important. I think that given the day and age we are in, we each have to understand that we all are going through something.
Yeah.
Each one of us, we have our challenges, we have things that are holding us back. I think that we have this common misconception that this one's more or this one's less. I think that if we started looking and empathizing with each other, saying, okay, well, you have your struggles, I have mine, let's talk about these things. Let's create awareness with that. I think that the world can be such a better place because of that, as you said, for the collective. And I wouldn't have known these things if I had not listened to TED Talks about men talking about their problems with mental health. And I'd not spoken to other entrepreneurs who are men and, them talking about very unique struggles to their journey. So it's important to talk about these things. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, nano influencer.
Yeah.
Let me put you out of your misery. So it's basically an influencer, but it is somebody with less than 1,500 followers. So it's
Okay.
just a nano influencer. So you're still an
Sure.
influencer, but you're building up. So it goes nano, micro, and then you slowly build up to becoming an influencer. Yes.
Gotcha. Wow. The terminology in there. So different.
Yeah, it's yes. So I say that only because I'm a marketer, and when it comes to marketing and influencer marketing, these are just very specific terminologies. But
Right.
yes, I guess you could call me an influencer just as a generic term.
Yeah. Yeah. You never, unless you're in that, you know,
In that space, yes,
in
yes.
that niche, you don't understand the lingo. And like if you had never followed me before, I would say some things that you would never understand, right? Like talking about trauma and CPTSD, you'd be like, what are all these
Yes,
acronyms you're saying to me?
absolutely.
Tell me more about your business. Tell me what you do. Tell me what
Okay.
your goal is. Where are you going in the next 5-10 years? Like what are you planning on doing?
Okay, so I basically, from India, I started my marketing consultancy firm in Delaware. So I basically started a company. It's a little different. It's a little unique based on the fact that I'm in India and that my company is in US. But that allows me to be a digital nomad. I'm a location independent marketing consultant. So I have the marketing nomad is basically my online pseudonym. I came up with it because I really love traveling the world, but at the same time, I also love marketing, and I wanted to build a business that allows me to travel while helping other small business owners with their marketing, and something that allows me to travel as well as pursue my passion. I took such a long time finding my passion that it is something that is important to me and something that I will never take for granted. So that is what I do. I have an Etsy store where I have digital products for business owners and entrepreneurs. On my Instagram, I'm my quirky self. I'm usually, giving tips, mindset tips actually to business owners and entrepreneurs. I'm sharing my journey. I'm telling them about the back end of what goes on with managing your business, the good, bad, and the ugly parts of it. Very, very honest on my Instagram page. And it's probably the best place for me to have conversations with people. And I think you did pick up on it, putting your most authentic self out there. We talked a little earlier, and that's exactly what I do on my Instagram page. My podcast, I basically give marketing tips to business owners. And YouTube, again, it's a mindset place where I have uncomfortable conversations with people, and I talk about how to lead a more enriching life. So that is basically what I do. I definitely do have a mission to share my story, my journey, and give people a good starting point to figure their life out. And it's not just with respect to marketing or business. I really do heavily focus on mindset as well. I think that's super, super important. As a business owner,
Oh yeah.
you know, mindset has been one of the biggest things. And I think that the journey has fundamentally been about me understanding myself. And through showing up for my business, I think I've shown up much, much better for the relationships in my personal life as well.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. You know, just being fully transparent about myself. You know, building my business. I started 2 years ago, and it was, you know, not only being a business owner, but being an influencer forced me to come into really close contact with my own values of like, who actually am I? Because I cannot put out a persona. I've done that for so long in my life that it nearly killed me. And I had to become really authentic. And that's what I started. When I started my social media, that was where I started. I was like, I don't give anybody any other advice than to be yourself. Right. And if people don't like it, then you either have to tell them to go fuck themselves, or
Absolutely,
you have to look at yourself deeply and understand maybe there's something about me that is a problem with many people. And if that's consistently happening, you know, our identity is a social incorporation of who we are. And if we don't kind of, you know, you can be like Steve Jobs and, you know, all of these other huge visionaries, you know, you can be like Elon Musk and you can pave your own way. But that doesn't always work for everybody, you know, like, and it becomes incredibly lonely when you identify yourself as being so different from everybody else that you can't have relationships, you know?
absolutely.
And you've got to look at that, and you have to be authentic, but you also have to understand when your authenticity is harmful to your relationships and recognize when change is actually necessary.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where, you know, where I had to really learn. I was like, you know, I gotta be me. And for the first time ever, I was actually me, you know, to a T, where it wasn't hurting me and it was helping others. And that's where I, you know, using that same logic and that same rationale, that's what I built for myself. And it seems to be working with, you know, almost 600,000 followers on TikTok now.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, it's crazy because I never expected that. But yeah, I mean, if you want to be an influencer, you got to know yourself, right?
You got to know yourself, absolutely.
Or someday people are going to question it, and you're not going to be. I mean, any press is good press, but I don't think you really want to deal with the bad press.
No. Not
right?
just that, I think it's exhausting when you're not yourself. You know, I was the first year of my entrepreneurship journey, I thought I had to fit a certain profile of how a business owner was. I was like very serious and, you know, just it was really draining my energy. And then now I do Bollywood dancing on my Instagram page. I'm just quirky, I'm funny, and it's definitely a weight off your shoulders, you know. Just forget the bad press or not aligning or all that. It's just a lot of unnecessary waste of energy pretending to be what you are not. Rather, if you just embrace yourself, you feel much more happier. When you're happier, you can show up for your business or show up for life in just so much more you know, positive energy, and you're ready to take on whatever life brings you, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Well, Prit, this has been an incredibly enriching conversation, a wonderful discussion about many things. Let's call it here, and let's get you to answer the last question, I think the most important question for most people. If there was a message you could leave the world, what would it be?
Take your time to find your passion. All right. Life is too short for you to be living a mediocre life. And when you do find your passion, and you will, and I promise you will, make sure that you give it your all. It deserves to be given every bit of your energy, every bit of your thoughts, every bit of your effort. And you'll see how that actually enriches your life. So yes, that is my message.
I love it. I love it. Prit, thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you. Thank
joining me.
you. It's been an honor.
Absolutely. Likewise. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing where you go. I definitely need to follow you on social media to keep in touch. But
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, if you are following this conversation still, if you're still listening, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like the video if you're watching on YouTube, and make sure you follow the podcast. Let me know what you think of this. Let Prit know what you think of this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would love for
connect.
you guys to like come and say hi. And thank you so much for listening all the way up until here. It's been an absolute honor for me to be a part of Dylan's podcast, and also, you know, sharing my journey with you. And I hope that you enjoyed this entire conversation.
Absolutely. I did. So I think that's all that matters, because this is my show. But guys, thank you.
But I hope you guys did too.
Oh, I'm sure they do. Typically, if they like me, they're gonna like you. If
Absolutely.
I like you. So there's that. But yeah, if you're still listening, thanks for watching the Dylan Experience or listening.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Perfect.